Yeah.
So yeah, thank you again for your talk. Let's come to the next speaker, Vlad. So Vlad Voina, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I think, oh, by the way, if you have questions to Vlad or to Alan or to us, then just feel free to just type them into the YouTube chat and prefix them with question in all caps, and then we can see it better, and then we're going to ask you a question on the chat. So with that, hello, Vlad. So I think I should just introduce, I should talk a little bit about how this session came about. So we actually met at Roli, where I joined the Juice team, which was around the beginning of 2015. And then later I moved on from Juice to the Blocks team. And so Vlad and I were actually working directly with each other for a little while. And then after the Blocks release, we both left, we kept in touch. And then about 1.5 months ago, I think, we had dinner together.
Sorry, that's my dog again.
Yeah, and I was just asking Vlad all these questions about, hey, you're a freelancer, how does this work out? How do you do this? How do you do that? And it was just like a dinner conversation, right? And then Vlad, you were saying all these things, and I was like, this is really interesting. I bet other people would be interested in that too. And so then we decided, well, let's just do a Q&A here so that everyone can benefit from hearing about this stuff. So this is basically how this came about. So I'm really, really happy that you actually said yes and you decided to join us here. Thank you very much. So why don't you tell us about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for that sort of little background intro. So as Timur said, my name is Vlad, and not too long after, I think after Timur left Roli, yeah, I think it's about a few months, maybe a bit longer. I decided to go freelance basically, and it was around that time, and I also founded my company, which is called Vocode, which I basically run alongside my brother, who's playing football now, actually, where I should have been maybe. But yeah, basically we build all kinds of music software, music audio software, anything from plugins to audio apps to installations. We've done a few installations, or like audio visual installations. We've even built like a quick sort of like video conferencing thing for some clients. So all kinds of things. I would say probably 99% in the realm of audio, music, video. Yeah, I mean, it's been like maybe like almost 2 or 3 years since me and Timur were working at Roli. Yeah, it's been a hell of a ride. So yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Right. Can you share anything at all about your current projects, or apart from what you said?
Well, the current project, basically at the moment, I have 2 projects going on. One is sort of like client external project, and one is an internal company project working on our own products. And it's like one of those things that probably is safer not to talk about the current projects, but I can definitely talk about the most recent projects.
Yeah, why don't you share something about that?
Yeah, so I think in June, it's probably June, yeah, we released Stutter Edit 2, actually, with working with BT. I'm not sure if many of you have heard of BT, but he's basically like, I think a lot of magazines call him like the parent, like the father of EDM or something like that, one of those sort of like cheesy sort of like names. But basically Brian is like he's like a music tech pioneer, essentially. Like he's built Stutter Edit like 15 years ago, the first version with Isotope, or maybe like 10 years, and I'm pushing a bit too long. And he contacted us to develop version 2, sort of like inherit Stutter Edit 1 legacy code, and pamper it up, make it future proof, and then also add a bunch of whole new features. So we released that in June, and it's been out for 3 months now, and yeah, it seems to be sort of like holding up.
All right. Well, that sounds like a pretty cool project that you were involved in.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
So I wonder, how did you get into freelancing? Did you just wake up one morning and decided, oh, I want to like quit my job and become a freelancer, or like, how does that, how do you get into it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's I think every time someone asks me that question, I probably give a different response. But I think I can probably make a like a summation, like an approximation of all my responses so far, and they kind of circle in the realm of, it felt right at the time. That's what I wanted to do. That's what I've always wanted to do. And then just sort of like the main ambition, most of the time this answer comes into my mind, was that I wanted to be able to, basically I wanted to be in control of when I can work on my own projects or on a company's projects, and sort of like external client work, which is I guess is very difficult to do when you're in a full-time job, and it probably also is probably not efficient either. So yeah, I think that was probably the main motivation. And there was also like, I also had a bit of an existential sort of like, well, okay, I'm pushing this too far, more of a like professional dilemma. After working for like almost 3 years at Rolly, I was like, oh, what next now? And this just felt like the right next step.
So, but it feels like, especially if you were just an employee before, where you get like your paycheck every month and it's like safe, like jumping into freelance feels like quite a bold kind of thing. Did you feel, were you like scared, or did you feel like it was like a natural thing to do, or?
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of back and forth, sort of like, oh, no, yes, no, yes, no. And I remember at the time I was in talks with my first clients, and they knew I was making the change, so they're really sort of like understanding and patient to sort of like they kind of knew. It was like, oh, we wanted to do this, this is how much we can pay, but we know that you're really giving up sort of like a monthly paycheck, I guess. But I would say, for anyone who's sort of like thinking of doing this, it's not, I mean, really the logical thing to do is make sure you save up some buffer cash. Like if that's something you can't do, then maybe it's not the right time, because it is risky. It's going to be stressful. Like if you can't sort of like buffer up at least like a couple of months of, sort of like, oh, I'm willing to work for 3 months on this, possibly on my own projects, and bring nothing into my bank, then you'll be fine. I think 3 months is probably enough. I think I had a bit more, but in retrospect, I never used it. So, but yeah, I think you need that for the sort of like peace of mind.
That's really good advice. So I'm wondering, so you were an employee before, so now you've been doing freelance quite successfully for a few years now. Which one do you like more? Because you mentioned, like, on the one hand, freelance, you can, what I'm hearing is that you can get more flexibility with working on your own stuff on the side. On the other hand, you said it's kind of more stressful sometimes. Like, what are the trade-offs, and do you feel like it feels right? Do you like, what are the pros and cons? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, well, again, I went through all kinds of sort of like epiphanies, yes, definitely freelancing. And then now I'm sort of like starting to see things kind of like on a more like, what's the opportunity at hand? If the opportunity at hand is a full-time job, but it's really what you want to do, and it has potential payoffs in the long term, then I don't think I would say no, freelancing is a better option now. Also depends a lot on how, on sort of like your working style. Like when I was in a full-time role, even though, you know, working for a startup can be quite messy, you know, I kind of enjoyed that sort of like, you know, at the end of the day, I know that I can leave the, you know, leave the office and everything's going to be fine. But sort of like when you're freelancing, that it's like kind of everything becomes like your whole day is potentially a working day. It's totally up to you, you know. So it's like a completely different way of viewing work. Also, sort of like I would say the main difference, like the sort of like the main, like the way the game's changed since I've been freelancing is that it kind of puts you in control of your timeline in a very unforgiving way. Of course, depends a lot. Like there are things to consider, you know, the different factors depending on the project, on how you charge basically. If you charge per hour, if you charge on a sort of like per project basis, all these decisions, even if they seem small, they really change how you plan your work, how you write your code, how you everything changes from these, based on these things. Again, you know, the sort of like depending on how time aggressive or, you know, impatient your client can be, that also influences obviously your working sort of like practice. But yeah, I would say working as a freelancer is definitely a bit more I think the best way to say it is like you'll get more sleepless nights. I think that's for sure.
So I guess that's not for everyone, but it can be quite rewarding.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the benefit is if you're working the extra hours and you've planned things right, then the extra hours will be essentially cash or whatever your agreement with the client is. But we can get a lot into these, but there's like it's a very complicated sort of like trade-off sort of like space that you're dealing with.
Yeah, so I want to drill down into that a bit later, but maybe since you mentioned like your time and kind of time management, what does your day look like? How do you manage your time? Is there like a fixed window where you work? You said like you need to be kind of always on call, but also you have like your own stuff going on. So how do you manage your day? What does that look like?
Yeah, so again, depends on how many projects. I've gone through different stages. You know, there have been times when I had 3 projects going on, and that was definitely too much. In those times, I definitely needed to be very organized with my time. So those sort of like times kind of make you sort of like self-aware, you know, a lot. It's like, for example, like I know that in the morning I get like about 2 hours, maybe probably 3, but like if I've had a really good night's sleep, then I'll get 3 hours of really deep work, and I can solve like, you know, I can solve problems that I've not seen before in the first 3 hours. So usually when I had a lot of projects going on and there were new things to solve, those 3 hours were just like sacred. Like I would just go to sometimes even working from a coffee shop, but I kind of knew that no one could bother me. Like even home, sometimes things can interject your sort of like mind space. So, you know, basically very sacred 3 hours or whatever your most focused work time of the day is. And then, take a little break, or, probably that could mean maybe lunch or something, and then come back. And I might get like another hour and a half of sort of like solid work. And then, you have all these sort of like interspersed times when you kind of know you're just kind of sitting at your laptop and you kind of just know that nothing really productive can happen, or like nothing creative can happen, but you can do more sort of like brainless tasks. I mean, I don't want to say brainless, because nothing, like when you're writing code, is never, it can't be brainless, but problems that you've seen before, or things that, fixing bugs that don't require, that are, trigger a different part of your brain. So that's sort of like, you know, finding the best parts of my brain when you have a very sort of like, oh, I need to finish this by then, this client wants that, I need to make sure I squeeze out the most out of my day. And I've tried all kinds of sort of like strategies, or I mean, I wouldn't call them strategies, they're kind of just going with the flow and seeing how you feel a lot. But like there've been days when I've worked on the same day for two clients. You know, I've tried for like sometimes working for 1 week just for one client and another week for another. It depends. I don't think I found like a magic formula. And you know, sometimes I try to be very sort of like diligent and organized, and that doesn't work out. You just kind of have to listen to your flow. You know, I don't know what I'm talking about now, but you know, yeah, that's sort of like the gist.
Yeah, I think I can relate to that. Also, the fact that you kind of figure it out as you go along, and it kind of changes as well. Like for me, for example, for a long time, I wasn't a morning person at all. I would like really struggle in the morning. But
yeah, I remember. Yeah.
But then this year I actually gave up coffee. So I'm not actually drinking coffee anymore. And that changed everything. So now, ever since I stopped drinking coffee, I just get up in the morning and I'm like, wow, I'm awake. I want to do stuff. And now, like what you described, like the first few hours are like the most productive ones. So obviously, like what I do right now, like involves a lot of meetings, a lot of talking to people, and like, you know, managing people, managing things as well. So I try to kind of have that more in the afternoon and then in the morning I have these like hours where I can actually do some technical work. But I don't think I've really figured out the magic formula yet either. So like every day tends to be a little bit different. So I guess, you just need to like listen to your body, listen to your brain, and just like experiment with different things, I guess, right?
Yeah, and then, you know, the clients really dictate what you do in a way. You know, it's like, for example, if there's something that needs to be done by the end of the week, you know, it's kind of like amazing to see what you can do when you know there's a hard deadline in front of you. Like sometimes I've had those 3 hours of productive work, you know, from 7 p.m. There have been times, and you know, it's like maybe those sort of like schedules I wouldn't be able to do unless I really knew I had to finish something. I really wanted to finish something. And sometimes I'm also sort of like hard on myself as well. You know, if I've spent 2 days or 3 days on something that should have taken me 3 hours, which is, you know, I imagine the story of every programmer, then, you know, if it's been 3 days, I kind of go really super hard on myself. Like, this needs to be finished, and I'll just whiz through it. I write the shittiest code that can be possibly written, but at least I'll finish it, and then see what happens from there.
Interesting. So yeah, I mean, I remember back in the day we had these things where we would like stay in the office until 1 a.m. to finish something, but I found that, at least for myself, that just doesn't work anymore. This is just not sustainable. So what I'm really trying to do is to have this like separation where at like 6 p.m. or whenever that is, you just kind of close your laptop and you're like, okay, now I'm done. And I'm just not going to look at this stuff anymore until tomorrow. And then the next morning, you have these like couple of hours where you're really productive and focused. And that's where you like finish everything. But yeah, of course, like, it's really interesting how everyone's kind of slightly different. And it also comes in phases where you have like phases where you just, burn the midnight oil, and other phases where maybe you're kind of a bit more.
Yeah, I always it's just something that's very useful to know. And I don't know if it's obvious to everyone, but like, sort of like, kind of like, I would say most of the deadlines can be moved. So that's something you need to know. It's like project managers or, sort of like directors in companies, a lot of the times they set timelines just because it makes people productive. It's like, even I think there's a law like Parkinson's law or someone like who said, time shrinks or expands to fit available space, and that's really true. But sometimes you gotta push that by 1 or 2 days by yourself, and work really hard for those 2 extra days to get them, because they could really make a big difference in the quality or the outcome of your work. So I would say always sort of like keep that in mind, and I always do that. But these days I tend to be super sacred with my deadlines. If even if the deadlines that I've set myself, or if the deadlines dictated by the client, or like sometimes the deadlines because there's marketing sync or whatever they are. Yeah.
All right, that's really interesting. So let's talk a little bit more about kind of the actual work with your clients and everything. So how do you actually get a contract? Like how do you get a client? Where do you look for contracts and clients? How do you get those things? How do you act and get a job, basically?
Yeah, so that's unfortunately the question that I have the least sort of like actionable advice to, unfortunately, because I've actually thought about, like, I think 90% of the jobs that I've done since I left Rolly have been either directly recommended, like through a direct recommendation from someone who I've worked with at Rolly, or an indirect recommendation somehow, or like someone I've met, sometimes like, the contracts, I met someone at football who knew that they've heard someone who was looking for, that sort of stuff. So it's always been sort of like emails in my inbox rather than me prospecting and sort of like I think I've emailed one client once for a job I saw, I think on the Juice forum or something like that. And it didn't go anywhere. It wasn't, it wasn't the right fit, or it wasn't good at that time. So yeah, basically like 95%, 90% have been indirect or direct recommendations.
Yeah, I think actually that happens a lot. Like that happened to me as well. Like my, the project that I'm currently involved in, the way it happened was I was working, back in Russia in St. Petersburg in my hometown, at JetBrains, not even doing music tech stuff anymore. And then I just got a message from someone someday saying that, hey, I've heard from some people at Native Instruments, which was like my job before Rolly, that, you're this and this engineer, you can do these and these things. Do you want to like work on that? I have an idea. And this kind of stuff. And I was like, okay, well, let's talk, and it seems like this is a common way how this can happen. And maybe the key is to kind of set yourself up in such a way that people kind of know what you do. Is that like fair to say that that's good advice? Or
yeah, that for sure helps. Yeah, you have to make sure. I think this is something that people don't realize. You have to be easy to find online. I think that's super important. Like, you don't have to, go crazy on your blog, or, like have all these like GitHub projects. I mean, I know a lot of people recommend that, but I think it, even one, like, for example, like a video, like you presenting a topic, or you talking about one of your projects. If it's at a conference, then amazing. If it's just you and a video online on a topic, then that's also super helpful. So it's like, for someone who's looking, you just have to put yourself in the, person who's looking for someone to do work, right? You just have to, it's like, what's the fastest way for me to get, usually in the contract business, like people need someone fast. Like I receive a lot of emails from people needing help, like less than a month's notice, and I usually don't get involved with those. But a lot of people do that. So, and if you're in that sort of situation, is like, you need to be able to evaluate that the person is right for the job very quickly. And if you can do that without having to interact with them, then that's amazing. Like for a sort of like, for a contractor, freelancer who's just starting out, obviously you want to have like projects that you've done online. You maybe you might have your CV if you've worked on a full-time job before, but it doesn't, it doesn't always fit. The CV doesn't say, how capable you are in certain areas that the client is looking help, is searching help for. So yeah, I think being available quickly, that's helpful. Obviously LinkedIn profiles, yes, stuff like that. I don't think there can be too many.
But speaking about being available quickly, like how do you juggle that? Like how do you, because you have like maybe your own project going on that you're working with, or you have 1 or 2 clients that you're already working with, how do you juggle this kind of like multiple clients and someone asking you for, you know, something on short notice? Like, how do you, like, maybe some of these clients even like compete with each other? Like, how do you even approach it?
That's fortunately, I've never had competing clients at the same time. I can't imagine how that would go, but I wouldn't think that would be a problem, because at the end of the day, you know, most of the times as a contractor, you're approached to. So I don't want to generalize, but generally your approach to solve a problem that's well defined. I think people generally come to you when they can, you know, they can offload something very easily. You know, if you're not part of the team, then you can imagine it's really hard to play it by ear and say, oh, you know, we'll see how it goes, you know, we'll pay you by the hour, and you know, and we'll see. No, it's not a very efficient way to spend your cash. So you need to make sure you have everything carved out properly. So, you know, when someone approaches you like that, then it doesn't really matter if they're competing, right? They have their own problems anyway. You're not like adding intellectual property that's gonna, you know, somehow offset. It's maybe in the best case scenario, you're fighting for time. Like if you're really like in some unfortunate situation, you end up with 2 clients trying to push similar products with similar timelines, and you're the one choosing which client to work first, then that might be a weird situation, but no one's gonna know, and I don't think that matters much anyway. But I think most of the times, so, you know, when I said I worked on, you know, for 3 clients at the same time, don't imagine 3 demanding clients at the same time. Like most of the times I have one long-term project that could be like even, you know, 1 year, or I think maybe 1 year is the longest. Like maybe Start Ready maybe took 1 year. So it wasn't, you know, it wasn't full-time 1 year, you know, maybe like, I don't know, 30%, or I don't know, like roughly. So, you know, you get these sort of like, you kind of get a bit of room for maneuvering, right? So, you know, if I'm at a point with a client where things are not super hasty, and I get an email, oh, I just need this job for 5 days, then I might take a 5-day job really, really quickly. If I'm really busy, then I won't, because I know it usually takes a lot more than that, you know. And like, also there's also this sort of like trick is like, it takes you 5 days really to do a job, but in your head the cost is as if it was 15 days.
It's because of the context switch, or
not just the context switch, just because you're dealing with a person that you haven't met before. And you know, it's like there are all these sort of like internal dialogues going on into your head. If I don't know, at least in my head, like, you know, how, you know, do they expect me to react quickly? Do they want that? Do they want that? So it's like, you know, how, you know, they're like this, but like
probing, like you're trying to figure out the context, and like
every
person, and the kind of reading between the lines, what's going on there, and things like that, right?
Exactly. Learning how the person communicates. And so there's all this like cost that you don't see. So generally, that's why I said I tend to avoid taking short-term projects, because they cost a lot more than what you're paid by the hour.
So
usually I actually charge more for short projects than I charge for long.
So speaking of charging, actually, that brings us nicely to the next topic. Like, let's say you have, you know, you have a client, you have someone who, you know, approaches you, hey, do you want to do this with me? And you say yes, and then, you know, I have time, I'm available. How do you charge them? Is it like per project? Is it per hour? How do you figure out how much it costs? How do you estimate that? And how do you actually charge for that? How does that work?
But let me take the book of black arts and do a few push-ups, and I don't know. It's very tricky. I think it's one of the hardest things, I would say, that I've had to learn. I don't know if learning is really the right word here, but to optimize, maybe to optimize. So, you know, there are a couple of things that I sort of like plan in. One thing I know for sure, and this is this is something that I figured out myself. I don't like working when it's paid by the hour. I personally don't feel motivated to work for something where I know, at the end of the day, this is going to happen. It's like everything is bounded. That's one reason I don't like it. The second reason I don't like it is because when you're working by the hour, it's like you're kind of asking to be managed. If you see what I mean, it's like if you're asking, if you're saying to your client, it's going to take me 10 days, and 3 days have gone by, and you have nothing to show, they will get like, whoa, well, what is this guy doing, And then if you're at the end of the 10 days, and never ever do you say, oh, it's going to take me 10 days and it's locked in stone. It's always going to be, maybe it's going to take me 10 days. So it's like you're always kind of asking the client to manage you. If you can, and this is what I try to do. I always try to ask to make a fixed price quote, or like a more of a sort of like per milestone. I can get into more details about this. Like it's actually there, different ways I don't even know exactly how to describe it. But basically, this is what I'm trying to point out. Like I prefer to work on a fixed-ish project basis, because then it forces me to be in control of time management. It forces me to be more, I would say, RC on my estimates. It's like it just changes the dynamics of the relationship, or the it's a very risky thing to do, and I definitely don't do it for short projects. Like if it's like, I don't know, maybe something less than 10 days, risky, because you don't have much room for error, right? Like if it takes you 15 days, then you're losing money. If it takes you less than that, then great, but it never takes you less than that. So
the thing that I'm really wondering is, because this is something I bumped against as myself in my career again and again and again, both as an individual developer and also like on the scale of a whole team or for a whole company, is like this kind of Hofstadter's law. Like everything takes 3 times longer than you think, even if you take into account Hofstadter's law.
Yeah.
But then if you're like forced to like just say, this is the price for the whole thing or whatever, like how do you get around Hofstadter's law? And what do you do if time runs out? Do you sacrifice code quality? Do you just go for the quick and dirty approach, or do you say, okay, we need to like change the plan now, or like how do you solve that problem?
Yeah, so they're all viable options, I would say. They're all viable options, the one that you've described. I would say the first question is like a sort of like on an opportunity basis. Like the first question is, what is this project really? What is this problem that I'm hired to solve? Is this a problem that I've solved before? If you're in that space, then everything's easy. Like estimations, I would say Hofstadter's law doesn't apply. If you've solved the problem before, then it's going to take you longer this time, because you're going to want to try something new that you haven't done before. Your engineering head is going to want to make it somehow better, and it's going to take you longer even the second time. Mm-hmm. But at least you're not in the, oh, I really don't know how much this is going to take me space. So if the answer to that question is, I've solved this problem before, then easy. If you're in the gray sort of like zone, oh, I haven't really done this before, this is kind of new, there's not much online where I could look on how to solve this problem, then it gets really, really, really tricky. So I've been through phases. Like I think I have this sort of like a 2x2 matrix kind of in my head always. So it's like there's the sort of like time sort of like axis, and then there's like the code quality axis. Let's say these are the only two sort of like axes that you're going for. It's like you can always crank up that sort of like finish it fast, but compromise on code quality. That's always an option. At least it works for me. Like I can definitely finish things much faster if I set myself to do. And a lot of the times you actually find out that things were much easier than you thought. So actually cranking up the sort of like the speed forces you to find solutions that you probably wouldn't have found otherwise if you hadn't spaced out. So, if you're in the, code quality compromise but finishing time quadrant, then I would say probably not very desirable. Someone's lost somewhere. Everyone can take their, sort of like conclusion. So
yeah, I think we've all seen stuff like that happening as well, right?
Yeah, there's obviously the first quadrant in the bottom right, which is you don't finish in time and the code is not great either, which is, I would say at that point it's probably okay for you to be losing money. I mean, it's probably fair. I mean, that's at least how I see it. If I land in that, if I land in that quadrant, then I tap myself on the back and I go, okay, maybe it's okay for me to have lower expectations on the rate that I set myself. For obviously the other quadrant is to sort of like finish, write great quality, but negotiate with the client a few more extra hours. Say, this is really not as easy as I thought, or this is whatever. You will have reasons. This is very important. Every time I've approached a client, if I've had to change my estimate, there were hard, solid reasons why. Because there's this problem that I have not seen before. There was this library that there's always something that's much easier to explain when you have it. But I think when you're sort of like working in a company and you've navigated the space, you kind of forget that there's the magic quadrant in the top right where you finish in time and the code is great as well. And I see a lot of discussions online. There's a lot of sort of like advice and contradiction for people talking about these quadrants where you're not really talking about the top quadrant. Then I think people forget that should be the aim. It's like I always set myself this task is like I need to finish in time and the code needs to be great. And just having that, just aiming for that, changes things completely. For me, like for example, I have this strategy now where if I'm starting a project and it's aiming to solve something that I've not done before, I always try to get to the finish line as fast as possible. It's like I sometimes see myself writing code that I know that with just another iteration could be much better, rather than, and I still finish that line just to get to the finish line. And you'll be surprised that, for example, if you're building projects with GUI and a lot of dependencies, and you'll be surprised how much you see if you've crossed the finish line once. You kind of get this bird's eye overview of everything, and then it's so much easier to know where to spend more time, where not to spend more time. A lot of the things become obvious. Like so many times I've seen myself optimizing something that just shouldn't have existed, or like just wasn't a problem like that. A lot of the times even the client doesn't know they need that problem solved. So I always, I think I'm more basic. I think if that's something that freelancing has taught me, is like, actually for me is more important to finish in time. And if it comes to the cost of code quality, then I will rather sacrifice than time. Mm-hmm. But obviously that doesn't translate as well if you're working in a sort of like software development team, and you have like a massive production suite, and you've got thousands and thousands of clients, and like every little detail counts. Like it's a different game. Like every sort of like situation is different.
I think it also depends on the lifetime of the code, right? Whether the code you're writing, whether it still needs to be around 10 or 20 years from now with something like the Juice framework or like something like that, right?
Yeah.
Or whether it's like, okay, here's a product, but like next year there's going to be like a new product, and then there's going to be a new product and stuff. I think, but
even then, like I always, I really don't want to sound like a manager, like some sort of like investor. But it's always a function of how much time you're putting in, how much does that time cost, and what is the potential value created by the product that you're building for your client. And very often, like especially in the music industry, I have a sense for that. Like I've seen products released. I kind of know how much a product can sell. Like if I see myself spending 10 days on a flanger that's just doing exactly the same thing, that it's like I just know that's just not efficient time spent, so no one's winning. It's like there are some things that have a time boundary where code really does not care. Sorry, the code quality is just not important because it's a loss in terms of
But
sort of market.
But I have a question here though. So all right, so let's say you finish the project, and then either you end up in this like top quadrant where you really want to be, where you have great code quality and you finished on time, or maybe you finished on time but you didn't spend 10 days perfecting the flanger, but you cut some corners and maybe the quality is like so. Like regardless of that, you're done, okay? But that's not where it ends, right? Because now you're going to release the product, and now someone's going to have to maintain it. Someone's going to have to fix bugs. Someone's have to like respond to like feature requests. Like how does this maintenance aspect work? This is totally not clear to me at all.
Yeah. So for let me think in terms of the projects that I've done. So I think for most of the projects I'm still the one who's maintaining them in a sort of like passive capacity. So on most contracts that I do with clients, we always discuss a maintenance plan, which is, if something comes up, then what sort of like ranges should I be looking at? Like much, how many weeks should I expect for you? What's the responsiveness that I should expect from you? Like, would you jump in a sort of like at a week's notice? Do you jump in at a 2 weeks notice? So there's always that discussion to have. What sort of rate should I be expecting? So for most of the projects that I do, they involve some sort of plan where I am incentivized to, fix the bugs that I've written.
Okay, yeah.
Honestly, but. For most projects that I've done, there was always like a delivery stage where, the products gets delivered to the client, and then he tests. Like I do preliminary testing, sort of like in-house, either me or my brother would test it, depending on who's written the code. So there's always a bit of testing, but then, the client tests it again, depending on their, on the complexity of their product. They might get a lot of coverage, they might get little coverage. So very rarely has it happened that, I've shipped a project and the clients come back to me like, oh, nothing's working. Oh, this is not, that's never happened. I think, at least I haven't received any angry emails so far. Hopefully this won't be the start of that, and it's not an invitation.
Well, I hope it's gonna be okay.
Yeah, but I see your point. No, I definitely see your point. Like it really depends on the projects, and I think maybe the projects that you have in mind are not really sort of like freelancer business.
Yeah, because if you have like a code base which is living for years and years and years, then actually 90% of the cost is in the maintenance, right? Often.
Yeah.
But for other projects, that equation is completely different. So I think, yeah, I understand what you're saying, that this just completely depends on the project.
Yes.
How many users you have and who these users are, and what they expect and things like that.
Yeah, for sure. But I just think it helps to have these things in mind, and at least to know what you're, at least to know the map that you're walking on. I think a lot of engineers forget that actually finishing in time is very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I can get behind that.
Yeah, and especially manager, as a manager, it's not helpful to put time pressure or time pressure on developers working on difficult problems. You know, not everyone.
It's a fine line though, right? Like if you can do this like
Yeah.
unconstrained engineer perfectionism thing where you're just never going to be finished because you want to get everything perfect. But then you also have this like immovable deadline thing where like, you know, whatever happens, we need to release on that day, which is also not very healthy. And the truth kind of lies somewhere in between, right? And this is, yeah, I think that's a fine line to walk, and also massively depends on the project. But yeah, I guess that's.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think we kind of now got to kind of a rough understanding of like how this all works. And so, you know, you got a contract, you're working on it, you have an estimate, you negotiate, you work on it, then you deliver it, and then you have some kind of deal to do maintenance. Okay, great. But there's like things that I guess that you do which are kind of beyond just working on the projects. Like, for example, what I'm wondering is there like a community of freelancers? Do you keep in touch with them? Do you like, is it like an online community of like different freelancers who like help each other out? Or is it like a very solitary kind of thing? Like, I don't know, is there like something beyond what you do that you're kind of a part of, or would you not see it that way?
Well, I would love to see it that way. It's just, it hasn't, like, something I've noticed since I've been freelancing is I actually get a lot less time to, you know, watch online talks. You know, I don't have that sort of like mental space that often to, you know, participate in extra, well, not extra professional stuff. It is still professional, but, you know, in a more sort of, oh, you know, what should I do with my hour? That kind of, that is not happened to me in the last 2.5 years, and I say it with sorrow.
Well, I'm very happy you made an exception for us and came here.
No, it's fine. No, this is fun. But, you know, it's like things like this, you know, it was actually quite helpful because, you know, me and Timur met and we talked about this. So I was kind of invested as well in this conversation. So this is great. But, you know, if I am myself, I sometimes you know, something needs to come on my plate in a way for me to really invest time. Which is not something I definitely not enjoy.
All right, so I think there's quite a few people who have questions to you on the chat as well, so I want to get to some of those, but let me ask you one last question. So for someone who's just considering getting into freelance, like, what is like the #1 thing you would recommend them?
The #1 thing.
Like, if you want to do this stuff, you really need to know this. Like, sorry if I'm putting you on the spot there, but like, it's
no, it's not on the spot.
Or like maybe what's like a thing that you wish you had known when you were getting into this? There
was a time when I knew this one. I actually, there have been times when I kind of was like, oh, this, but now it doesn't come into my head. I don't think there are various things that I wish I knew.
All right. So maybe some of them will come up now in the.
Oh, I think I know. Okay, so yes, this is the one thing that you should know. It's like, freelancing is not an end game. I think that's the gist. If somehow you've built in your head that freelancing is somehow you know, a step forward to a full-time position in any way, definitely not. I think the end game is for you to invest as little time as possible into something that then gets launched into the world and then just generates value just because it exists and you don't do anything. That's the end game. If freelancing gets you there, amazing. If freelancing is just a way for you to, you know, crank up that cash inflow, good, but not as a long-term solution. It you know, it can be done, and it's definitely, you know, something. I mean, I definitely don't have anything against that, but I don't think it should become a lifestyle for anyone.
All right. Well, that's great to know. Thank you so much for your valuable insights.
No, thanks. That was
learned
really...
a lot from this conversation.
Yeah, that was. Yeah, it was interesting to hear your questions.
Yeah. Wow, thank you very much for that, Vlad. That was very insightful. I mean, a hundred, I have 100,000 questions. This could probably easily turn into a 3 hour conversation between us, but I will
That's fine.
let
I'm here.
I will let the audience ask the questions first. So some of these have been pretty much covered in your conversation, but uh, one person asks, I will rephrase their question because I think I understand what they're getting at. Uh, when did you know that you were ready for freelancing? So, you
Hmm.
know, you're programming, you're doing your thing. You worked at Rolly. When did you have a good feeling that okay, I'm ready to make a transition into
Hmm.
doing this on my own?
Oh, yeah. I see. I never thought of it like that. I think if I look back now, I probably wasn't ready when I started, if you know what I mean. It's like one thing I knew for sure is like I had been working with Juice at the time that I went freelancing for, I think it was already like 3 years at Rolly. And being next to Jules also helps. It kind of, it kind of it does speed up things. At least you don't have to go to the Juice forum anymore. There's an efficiency in that channel. Obviously, there are people like Timo, Fabian also is amazing. Everyone at Rolly was super. So I don't want to put a timestamp to that, like 3 years, and then I was ready. But I knew when I moved into the next job that it was Juice based. So the client was working with Juice. They were actually people I worked with at Rolly.
Mm,
Um, so it's kind of hard to answer that because for me it was obvious that was there were not that many risks in that move.
mm-hmm,
Um, if you're considering of making this change and you don't have a job lined up and you're willing to sort of like take the risk of like, oh, let's see what happens, then I have no advice for you.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Some of these other ones have already kind of been answered, so I'm going to skip through them. Another question is about client communication. How do you communicate timeframes to your client? Do you give them a range? Do they give you the deadline?
That's the first question I ask. Basically, the first question I ask is like,
Mm-hmm.
how yeah how tight on time are you? That's literally the first question. If they come back and they say, oh, it needs to be done by then I work backwards from there. And if I end up on the other side of the ocean, then I say no.
Mm,
If I end up if I end up somewhere close, then I'm in the, oh, we can work with this space.
mm,
In that sort of like space, I depends on the length of the project. I tend to sort of like break it down in as many modules as possible. I always approach it on a sort of like build sort of like vertically first, and then expand sort of like horizontally. So I run through all the modules really quickly in a first milestone. I kind of group things in milestones, and then each milestone in its own sort of like sub phase in a way. So and then I make like a final proposal where each milestone is sort of like quoted, and then each phase is quoted, and then I always put an asterisk and say the prices for the sub milestones are kind of rough. There's overlap. There's always overlap. I kind of so yeah, that's how I kind of go in my planning stage. And then in my in my estimation to the client, I zoom out first and then keep zooming in. And that's sort of like high res to sort of like low res to high res. That's also seen in the estimates that I make. So I usually say this will take I can finish this by then and it will cost about this. I can finish this by then and it will cost this. And I send them a huge proposal. Like it's that's one of the sort of like the tricky things, because very often like I'm spending actually considerable time on making these proposals and not considering that time in the bill to say so. So that's another thing. Is like when you have to make and when it's your money in the game, then you're really putting the extra mental effort to see through possibilities, and make plan things through properly. So yeah, I try my best to give to give estimates on a module, milestone, iteration, sort of like, if there's something to be found out, for example, if we're working on something we don't know the answer to, and the next phase depends on that answer, then I will phase it in a sort of like iteration base. So sometimes there are projects where I go, oh, we know what to do here, and then there's we have to try some things out here, and I go, oh, we allocate 2 iterations of 2 weeks for this. Each iteration will cost this. Take this amount of time. If this happens, then we can finish with 1 iteration. It's just a big sort of like decision tree.
Mm-hmm.
And each node has like some sort of range to it, like a plus minus days range kind of thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, definitely. I think I already know the answer to this question, but I said that I would ask, how much, do you have a static fee that you charge for maintenance, or is that kind of built into your overall proposal at the very beginning, where you say, okay, after this project, because of course, once, when you're talking about a project, from your experience, there's going to be some work that's going to come afterwards. Do you, is there normally like a static rate that you charge for that, or do you just, how do you factor that in?
Yeah. So, I tend to go with a per hour rate for that sort of like maintenance plan.
Okay.
Just so that the client kind of, knows if something happens, it just helps them calculate, budget, and, sort of like risk tolerance in a way. It's like you're always in that position. It's like, I've got this cash, I need to make sure I hit the finish line. I do like most of the projects that I work on these days are kind of projects where I kind of really want to be part of. So I say no more often than I say yes these days, and even if that means I'll be making a lot less. So for projects where I really want to be part of, for the maintenance plan, I kind of tend to try to negotiate sort of like a sales royalty or some sort of like long-term compensation plan, which also incentivizes me to do the best job possible. So that's the sort of like, I would say, dream scenario that I always aim for. I hope, I always want to say yes. Like I have this sort of like rule which I borrowed from this guy. His name is Naval. He's like a Silicon Valley investor thingy, and he's saying like, if it's not a definite yes, it's a no. Oh, yeah. And I kind of use that heuristic now in my sort of like client picking, and thankfully so far I've been in the position to be able to say no more often than I can say yes. But at the beginning I definitely wasn't in that space. So yeah.
Interesting. I mean, I have loads of questions and discussion items, but I think Alan had a question that he wanted to ask, so I'll let Alan go first.
Yeah, I had a couple for Vlad. The first one is more of kind of like a mental state kind of question. I'm sure a lot of us, especially myself included, when we work, we often have imposter syndrome. And so I feel like when you're freelancing, like imposter syndrome would like reach like a next level. And so my question is like, have you experienced that yourself?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, so I'm kind of like, I've been through phases of this, but what tends to...
Oh, you froze.
Uh-oh.
Very often I kind of... Sorry.
Yeah, you froze for a second. Yeah, go start again.
Yeah, I think very often I'm kind of just comfortable with that feeling, because really it's like, you're in a space where problems dictate, like you don't know all the problems. So it's like, I would feel that's, that's like just a natural feeling to have in it, and it's the right feeling to have. You must be humble to the problem that you're approaching, but that should not influence price you ask for. So I kind of keep my head in a sort of like what, so like there's a sort of like inflationary sort of like theory probably there as well, but I always try to charge the price that is right for the market, not the price that I feel is right, because you're always underselling yourself if you think, if you let the imposter syndrome influence your basically the value that you ascribe to yourself at the end of the day. It's like you should always probably triple or maybe like times by 4 the value that you think you're worth, because that's what you will be worth by the time you finish that project in that space and with that problem. So if you're always undercharging yourself, if you're always undercharging based on that imposter syndrome, then you're always going to be one step behind the market, right? That's how I see it.
Okay. So I guess it would be safe to say that when you first started out freelancing, you weren't essentially undercharging, or you weren't undercharging your clients. You were like right from day one of freelancing, you were charging what the appropriate market price would be.
There have been a few projects where I definitely I wasn't happy with the final, count of days, and but not so unhappy such that it wasn't a good deal. Do you see what I mean? It's like it's like also what I mentioned earlier is also probably a good buffering technique as well for your errors in estimation, maybe. If I usually factor that in different ways in the project proposal, but generally I think you want to put in as many safety nets as possible. And very often, the client will come back and say that's too much, or they just won't reply to your email anymore. And that probably means, it probably is the right thing. If you didn't get it, probably they had the budget was completely different to. You're either not the right person, or they shouldn't be building that product in the first place.
Right.
So you don't want to be part of those. Definitely, like the worst thing is meeting clients who are super demanding and also have very tight budgets, and you actually see that quite often in the audio industry, as you might it's not finance, like most of the people like either indie companies or very often you get very big companies who are being profitable for years on end. So it's a very healthy space to be in, I would say. It teaches you the right lessons about the value of money and time.
I just had one other question, and suppose you weren't able to meet a deadline in time, or you find that something is you're going to have to charge more. My question is, like, how do you approach the client when you essentially ask for more time?
Well, most of the times I don't ask for more time out of their own pocket, because I try to give a fixed price quote. So usually it's much easier to approach them to say, it's going to take a week more than I thought, because they'll go, okay, cool.
Oh, really?
Right? Of course. Well, of course, if that doesn't cost them more, right? But if
that's true. Yeah.
If they have to sync with, like, usually this is what dictates hard deadlines, which are not affected by budget, right? It's things like, the product release was planned for this date and the marketing team has prepared this, and there's some sort of like interdepartmental sync, or there's, I don't know, there's always there are always reasons like that.
Definitely seen that in companies.
I've not had I think a good planner, like someone who's had experience in the industry, or like just software experience in general as a manager, will always buffer on their side as well. So what tends to happen is you're buffering on your side, they're buffering on your side, on their side, and things work out somehow magically.
That's all the questions I had. Over to you, Josh.
Just to touch on that, as I've experienced quite a few projects now, and just to touch on that question, my advice is communication. You just have to really
Hmm.
communicate with the client, and you really have to let them know up front that what the expectation is. That sometimes things do overrun, sometimes things do not run to plan. Sometimes there might be a bit of time that you have to kind of R&D things in order to get to the next stage. But the biggest thing is just transparency with the client and communication with them every step of the way, letting them know where you're at, where your teammates are at, and so on and so forth. So just have to let them know. Don't let them know when it's too late. Try to
Yeah,
let
for
them
sure.
know.
Yeah.
Let them know as soon as possible. When you see things aren't going to plan, the best thing to do is just get on an email, get on a call really quick, and say, look, this is happening. I think that something's going to come up. This is kind of where we're at. So
Yeah.
um,
I have a I have a sort of like self sort of like radar rule. Like if you're getting an email from the client, how are things going? It's a really bad sign.
mm,
So
mm,
if you ever get that email, how are things going? I just wanted to check in. You're not doing something well. So I think that just sort of like doubles up, sort of like Josh's point. Like
mm,
you need to be proactive about your communication with your client. Like,
yeah.
if things are taking longer, then yeah, let them know before they ask you.
Yeah. I had a question. For you, and this is something that I've seen with a lot of. I see a lot of people in the community that that are looking to make a transition towards freelancing, and one of the big things is that on top of the software engineering, you have what you were talking about before, which is the client relationship. Budgeting. Now you're your own
Mm.
project manager. In your company with your brother, do you divide those duties up, or is it just kind of a free for all? How do you actually handle that? Because uh, I could imagine that if all of both of you are trying to do all of those things, that maybe it could be a challenge to just switch your context all the time from being in a programming mindset to being in a
Yeah.
project management mindset.
Yeah, well, for us, it's very simple in that sense because I'm definitely more experienced, at least in this industry as well. So between me and my brother, it makes a lot more sense for me to be doing the planning and all the technical sort of like management stuff. So what we tend to do is like, when there's a new project, I organize. I do a lot of sort of like, basically when I talk to my brother about planning things specifically, it's usually, oh, you can jump on this phase, you can jump on this milestone, you can do this. Obviously, I keep, we work across the same desk, right? So we do talk a lot informally, but I don't think I've reached that point where delegation has become a problem, or
Yeah.
definitely, especially not with my um brother, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you
um
brought up I think to touch on another great point that you brought up earlier, and this brings up a question. So many people, and I'm sure the question that is in everybody's mind is, how much do you charge? For
mm,
this, and what do you charge? And what I tell one thing that you touched on earlier that I think is great, maybe I hope a lot of people didn't overlook was, well, how much is the client going to make off of this thing that you build? You know,
mm.
if you build something and you build it for $1,000, and they can make $100,000 off of the product that you've built from start to finish. You know,
Yeah.
it's kind of a ripoff, isn't it? you know,
Yeah, it depends though. I
yeah.
I wouldn't I wouldn't yeah, I mean,
I
I
mean,
definitely.
I know that's a simplification.
Yeah.
I know that's an oversimplification. Especially when you're not the only person that's involved in that product life cycle. Where if you're doing like to another business, and that business has marketing teams, they have project managers that they have to employ, they have more they have an entire software team that you're integrating
Yeah.
with, things like that. It's a much bigger picture, much more complex. But um, there, I, I I think that I know that in my pricing to my clients, a big part of the consideration in what this is going to cost is, well, what's the market potential here in terms of,
Mm-hmm.
how difficult is the problem? How difficult is the problem to solve? Like this.
Yeah,
this
I think
thing.
that's the right question to
Yeah.
ask. Yeah, I generally don't like to. I like, if obviously the market that the product will be exposed to is a huge. It's kind of like, it's like a, like a hidden voice there that tells you, oh yeah, you can crank things up. But I try my best to think, how much value am I really, like, what is it that I'm actually doing? If someone's asking me to write them a JSON parser, or I don't know, that's a bad, like a, an SFZ parser, okay? There aren't many SFZ parsers out there, by the way, or at least I haven't found many that are open source. So, if someone's asking to do something like that, it's like, there's just clearly, like, it's just a thing to be built, and it's like, sorry, I don't have the guts to ask for value pricing. I'm just gonna time box my hours. Like, if someone's calling me to solve a problem that I'm really good at solving, and it's like, there's also sort of like an efficiency factor involved, like I can finish it much faster, obviously. Then there's also sort of like, I really have insights in this particular problem, like I've done these things before, it's like that. If that's one thing. If there's a sort of like it covers many areas, and I'm really the one at the intersection, and I can sort of just grab this whole problem and kind of bang it in like a few months, then I think that my value should be non-linear. So in that sort of case, usually I do my best to sort of like value price it in a way. But like I mentioned before, it's like, I really want to be like, the ideal is you work on projects where you really, really, really think it would be a great hit in the long term. So in that case, I do my best to take a bit of the risk on my side as well, and say, look, I'm willing to actually lower my hourly rate in exchange for some sort of royalties that involve risk on my side. And then only then am I in a position to be expecting non-linear returns from the work that I do. I think
sorry.
Yeah, that's kind of how I see things in terms of, yeah.
But I guess then you're also committed to it on a different level, right? If it's just
Yeah.
like mercenary, you're paid by the hour, that's one thing. If you're actually committed to making something a success, I think that's like a bit of a different game, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I've been to phases where it's really purely been a monetary sort of like motivation. That's fine too, but yeah, it depends. Like the end, I would say it's not the end game. That, I mean, it kind of goes back to the, like, I am definitely more motivated when it's something that I really believe in, or like where I have a bit of a stake. If even if it's a personal sort of like stake, or it's some experience stake, or some sort of stake. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions? Any other anything else from you, Timur?
No, I think we're good. I definitely learned a lot. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I did have another.
I mean, we could keep talking for another 2 hours, I guess, but we just need to. It's like with coding, you can't really finish. You can just stop,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
No,
I did have another question, but I can't remember it now. So I should have written it down. That'll be the one. That'll be the one for part 2.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. Okay, so I think that it's a good time to wrap up. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Alan. There was a question for Alan actually, asking if he actually freelances. Do you freelance, Alan?
No, I do not.
Okay. Are you working for a company?
It's been on my mind a lot, though.
Yeah. Are you with a company, or do you?
Right now, no.
Okay.
I'm not working.
Okay. Cool.
Thankfully, it gives me a lot of time to work on my own projects that I could never get around to while I was working.
Yeah.